A few years ago, most executives would have made a simple assumption. When the work is specialized, the AI should be specialized too. For medicine, that sounds obvious. Doctors need reliable information, patients can be harmed by bad advice, hospitals have privacy rules, liability risk, and decades of clinical standards. So, when a tool is built specifically for clinicians, branded for clinicians, and wrapped inside a medical interface, it naturally feels safer than a general-purpose AI model. That is the intuition. A recent Nature Medicine paper put that intuition under pressure. The researchers compared specialized clinical AI tools, including open evidence and up-to-date expert AI, against frontier general-purpose models such as GPT 5.2, Gemini 3.1 Pro, and Claude Opus 4.6. They tested them on medical exam questions, health response benchmarks, and real clinical questions asked by physicians in a live clinical environment. The surprising result was that the general-purpose frontier models outperformed the specialized clinical tools across the major evaluations. For healthcare, that finding matters immediately. For every executive buying AI, the lesson is even bigger. Because this is not only a story about medicine, it is a story about trust, procurement, and the dangerous comfort of a polished product label. When a product says clinical AI, we assume the clinical part is doing real work. When a vendor says built for legal teams, we assume it beats a general model on legal reasoning. When another vendor says AI for finance, we imagine specialized data, specialized logic, specialized safeguards, and specialized performance. Sometimes that assumption will be right. In this paper, it was not. The researchers did something every organization should copy. They did not ask which tool looked more professional. They did not stop at the vendor promise. Instead, they created a head-to-head evaluation and asked a more uncomfortable question. When doctors actually need answers, which system performs better? The first part of the study used a MedQA, a set of medical licensing exam-style questions. Think of it as a written exam for medical knowledge. On that test, Gemini scored 97.4%, GPT scored 94.2%, and Claude scored 90.2%. The specialized clinical tools came lower, with open evidence at 89.6%, and up-to-date expert AI at 88.4%. That alone would be interesting, but medical exams are not the same as medicine. A board-style question is usually clean. It has a clear prompt, a fixed answer, and a tidy structure. Real clinical work is not tidy. A physician may ask a question halfway through a patient's course. The context may be partial. The answer may require judgment, not just memory. A useful response has to be correct, but it also has to be complete, safe, and easy to act on. So the researchers moved to a second test called Health Bench. This benchmark looks at free response health questions and scores how well the answer aligns with clinician expectations. Here, the gap became much wider. GPT scored 88.0. Gemini scored 79.3. Claude scored 77.0. Open evidence scored 62.6. Up-to-date expert AI scored 61.3. At that point, the pattern was hard to ignore. Still, the most important test was the third one. The researchers collected 100 de-identified real clinical queries from physicians using a HIPAA-compliant GPT instance at NYU Langone. These were not textbook questions designed for a benchmark. They were questions physicians had actually asked during routine clinical work. 12 US clinicians then reviewed the AI responses without knowing which system produced which answer. That blinding is crucial. Once you remove the brand name, the answer has to stand on its own. The clinicians scored the responses across 4 dimensions: clinical correctness, completeness, safety and harm avoidance, and clarity for clinicians. Those dimensions matter because clinical usefulness is not a single number. A response can be factually correct, but incomplete. Another can be safe, but too vague. A third can contain the right information, yet be so disorganized that the clinician has to work too hard to use it. In this real clinical query evaluation, the frontier models again formed the top group. Gemini scored 3.62 out of 4. GPT scored 3.54. Claude scored 3.52. Behind them came Google AI Overview at 3.27, OpenEvidence at 3.24, and UpToDate Expert AI at 3.17. That comparison is the part that should make executives pause. A search-embedded AI feature performed in the same tier as the specialized clinical AI products. That does not mean doctors should use Google search summaries to make clinical decisions. It also does not mean hospitals should casually replace clinical systems with consumer chatbots. The correct takeaway is sharper. Specialization did not automatically create superior performance. The tool built for the domain did not win simply because it was built for the domain. A good metaphor here is the difference between a chef's knife and a branded kitchen gadget. The gadget may be designed for one specific task. The packaging may show the perfect use case. In a demo, it may look impressive, but in the hands of someone doing real work, a sharper general tool can still outperform it. That appears to be what happened here. Frontier models are general tools, but they are extremely sharp. They have benefited from massive training corpora, heavy investment, fast iteration cycles, and extensive alignment. They have also learned patterns across medicine, science, communication, law, software, and reasoning. That breadth may give them an advantage when the task requires not just facts, but the ability to synthesize, explain, and adapt. Specialized tools may have another advantage in theory. Many of them likely use retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. In simple terms, RAG lets a model search a trusted knowledge base before answering. For medicine, that sounds ideal. Give the model access to clinical references, guidelines, and evidence, then let it produce a grounded answer. The problem is that retrieval is not magic. A library card does not make someone a good doctor. Access to the right books helps only if the person can choose the right page, understand the context, and explain the answer clearly. When retrieval pulls in irrelevant material or the base model struggles to integrate the evidence, the answer can become cluttered, incomplete, or misleading. That point matters far beyond healthcare. Many companies believe their AI problem is solved once they connect a model to internal documents, upload the policies, add the knowledge base, build a chatbot, put a nice interface on top, call it enterprise ready. Reality is less forgiving. The knowledge base may contain the answer, but the system still has to retrieve the right information. After retrieval, the model must reason over it correctly. Then the response needs to fit the user, the workflow, and the risk level. A poor answer with a citation is still a poor answer. A confident summary from the wrong source can be worse than no answer at all. One of the most interesting findings in the paper is that hallucination was not the main difference between the systems. The researchers did not find significant differences across models in harmful responses or hallucinations. That challenges the common executive fear that AI failure always looks like a model inventing something outrageous. Many failures are quieter. A system can leave out a safety-critical detail. A response can be too incomplete to guide action. Poor structure can make the answer hard to use. Excessive refusal can turn a tool into a locked door at the moment someone needs help. UpToDate. Expert AI refused 19% of real clinical queries in the study, much higher than most other models. In a medical setting, refusal can be appropriate. A system should avoid giving unsafe or unsupported advice. Yet a tool that refuses too often creates a different operational problem. It may be safe on paper, but unhelpful in practice. Open evidence seems to struggle especially with clarity. That is also important because clarity is not cosmetic. In clinical work and in most of the executive workflows, clarity determines whether information becomes action. A messy answer creates work. A clear answer removes work. Executives often underestimate that distinction when evaluating AI. They ask whether the system is accurate, but they do not ask whether the answer is usable at the speed of the workflow. In a hospital, a physician does not need a beautiful essay. They need the right answer with the right caveats in a form that fits the decision they are making. The same principle applies in finance, compliance, recruiting, sales, and operations. A model that knows the answer but cannot deliver it well is like a brilliant consultant who buries the recommendation on page 47. Technically useful, operationally painful. The paper also makes clear that these results are a snapshot, not a permanent ranking of every AI system forever. That nuance is important. Specialized tools may improve, frontier models may change, deep subspecialty tasks may benefit from domain-specific systems. Some hospitals may eventually build local models that combine frontier reasoning with institutional data, internal policies, patient population context, and workflow-specific guardrails. In other words, the conclusion is not that general AI always beats specialized AI. A better conclusion is that specialization has to prove itself. The word clinical should not function as a hall pass. The phrase built for your industry should not end the evaluation. A vendor's interface, citations, and brand trust may be useful, but they are not evidence of superior performance. That leads to the procurement lesson. Before buying an AI tool, an organization should build its own benchmark, not a generic benchmark copied from the internet, not a vendor-provided test, not a cherry-picked demo, a real benchmark built from the actual work people do inside the business. For a hospital, that could mean de-identified clinical questions from real workflows. For a law firm, it might be contract review tasks with expert scoring. For a bank, it could involve compliance memos, customer risk decisions, and internal policy interpretation. In recruiting, the benchmark might test candidate matching, outreach quality, bias risk, and recruiter usability. The method does not have to be complicated at first. Collect a meaningful sample of real tasks, remove sensitive information, define what good looks like, compare the specialized tool against frontier models, blind the reviewers when possible, score the outputs across the dimensions that actually matter. Accuracy is one dimension, completeness is another, safety matters, clarity matters, workflow fit matters, cost, latency, citations, privacy, audit logs, and integration burden also matter. Only after that evaluation should the buying decision begin to feel serious. Without that process, procurement becomes theater. The company watches a demo, feels impressed, signs a contract, and discovers 3 months later that employees still prefer the general model because it gives better answers. That situation will become more common. Frontier models are improving quickly. Vertical AI vendors are appearing everywhere. Many will claim that their product is safer because it is specialized. Some will genuinely be safer. Others may simply be packaging a weaker model behind a professional interface. From the outside, those two can look similar. Evaluation is how you tell them apart. There is also a governance lesson here. AI governance is often presented as a brake, something that slows innovation down. This paper shows the opposite. Good governance is not bureaucracy. It is the mechanism that prevents the organization from confusing confidence with evidence. A mature AI program should know which tasks a system is allowed to perform. It should have a way to measure whether the system performs those tasks well. Failure modes should be tracked, not guessed. Model performance should be reevaluated over time. because the market will keep changing. The best organizations will not choose one AI model and freeze their strategy around it. They will build an evaluation harness that lets them compare models, vendors, workflows, and risk profiles continuously. That is the real executive capability. Not prompt engineering alone, not a giant list of tools, not a one-time AI roadmap. The durable advantage comes from knowing how to test AI against the work that matters. Healthcare leaders should be especially careful with the interpretation. This paper is not a permission slip to deploy frontier models casually in clinical settings. Medicine has privacy constraints, regulatory risk, institutional policies, documentation requirements, and patient safety stakes. A model that performs well in a benchmark still needs careful deployment, monitoring, and governance. The more practical lesson is that hospitals should demand independent, real-world validation before trusting any AI system in care-related workflows. A familiar clinical brand may reduce anxiety, but it should not replace evidence. A frontier model may perform impressively, but it still needs guardrails, privacy controls, auditability, and local workflow adaptation. Future clinical AI may look less like a single chatbot and more like a carefully managed system. A frontier model might handle reasoning and communication. A hospital knowledge layer could provide local policies, formularies, care pathways, and documentation rules. Monitoring tools would track drift and errors. Clinicians would remain responsible for judgment, especially in high-risk decisions. That architecture is less exciting than a vendor demo. It is also much closer to how serious AI will actually enter healthcare. The same pattern will probably play out across the economy. The first wave of AI adoption was about access. Companies wanted tools, employees wanted co-pilots, vendors sold interfaces. The next wave will be about proof. Which system performs better? Which one fails less dangerously? Which one reduces work? Instead of adding another layer of review. Executives who understand that shift will ask better questions. They will not ask, is this AI built for my industry? And stop there. A stronger question is, where does this tool outperform a frontier model on our actual work? A second question follows naturally. Can we measure that improvement before we scale it? Those two questions can save a company from buying expensive illusion. The bigger story is that AI is changing the meaning of expertise in software. For decades, specialized software usually meant deeper functionality. A radiology system was obviously more relevant to radiologists than a general office tool. A legal research platform was obviously more relevant to lawyers than a generic search engine. Foundation models complicate that logic. A general model can now carry broad reasoning ability into many domains at once. When that general intelligence becomes strong enough, vertical products have to earn their place through data, workflow, trust, compliance, and measurable performance. Branding alone is not enough. Specialized AI can still win. It wins when it has proprietary data that the general model cannot access. It wins when the workflow integration is so good that users save time immediately. It wins when the system has domain-specific evaluation loops, better citations, better controls, better auditability, or better outcomes in real tasks. Without those advantages, specialization is just a costume. The Nature Medicine paper gives us a clean warning. In a domain as serious as medicine, the clinical AI label did not guarantee superior answers. General-purpose frontier models performed better across knowledge, expert alignment, and real clinical queries. That result should make every organization more disciplined. Do not outsource trust to a product category. Do not let a polished interface substitute for evidence. Do not assume that a vertical tool is better until it proves itself against the best general alternatives. For leaders, the next step is clear. Start with the work. Build a benchmark from real tasks. Compare systems blindly, measure accuracy, completeness, safety, clarity, and usability. Keep testing. As models change, AI will keep moving, vendor claims will keep getting louder, specialized products will keep multiplying. The companies that win will not be the ones that buy the most AI. They will be the ones that evaluate AI the best. That is where trust begins. Not with the label, with the evidence.